Delighted to have the opportunity here today to talk to such an august audience, and I'd like to thank Google for the fact that they've put startups at the heart of the innovation and transformation agenda. So Startup Ireland is a group of volunteers who are committed to putting startups at the heart of things in Ireland. Just very quickly on a show of hands to get a sense of the audience here today, could I have a show of hands on anyone who's been involved in startups, mentoring, advising, investing, being in startups? Great. You're the converts. It's the people who didn't put their hands up today who my message is reaching out to today to recruit you to our mission. Theme of some of the talks today has been that startups are very much the threat to the established corporates and the companies that you represent, those who didn't put their hands up. And yes, it is very much the case. Singularity University would point out that we are in an era where startups can use exponential technologies and get to market very, very quickly with products that could potentially cannibalize your offerings. And Bain and Company did some research, and they found that 10 years ago it took 15 million to successfully scale an early stage software company, and that's now down to a fraction of that can be achieved for 1 million today. Rocket Space are a well-known US advisor on accelerator space to corporates, and they make the case that small teams of individuals now can achieve what really in the past could only be achieved by governments and large corporates like Google. So if startups are what it's all about, how are we doing in Dublin? The Central Bank of Ireland did research last year, and they found that startups are the largest net contributors of new jobs in our economy. So the startup agenda is an extremely important agenda, and Dublin needs to be at the start of that. This is a research report that was completed in 2012, the Startup Genome. It compiled an international ranking of the top 20 startup ecosystems in the world. Unfortunately, Dublin didn't appear in that. They judge it on the basis of startup activity, the amount of risk capital in the ecosystem, the founder mindset, like how ambitious, is the typical tech startup. Do they want a 5 million company, or do they want to be a world beater? And other factors. I would say from personal experience, the stage we're at in Dublin is very much stage number 2 there in terms of maturity, the hype stage. And we really need to take concrete steps to move us into the independence stage. But on the other side of that, research has been completed recently by the Startup Europe Partnership. And the case there puts us on a level in terms of those companies that have reached 1 million plus in euro investment, startups. We're doing quite well. We're on a par with Madrid, we're on a par with Paris. However, we're only a fifth of the size of London. Now, in fairness, Google Campus is located in London. It's a fantastic facility for accelerating startups. We'd love to see a Google Campus of the same scale in Dublin. Well, even bigger, actually, in fairness. Let's go for it. And if we want to be ambitious, rather than measure ourselves against the existing European startup ecosystems, let's look at the really big player of them all, number 2 in the world, which is Tel Aviv in Israel. And the World Startup Report, which was completed in 2013, unfortunately, again, Dublin didn't appear in that. They compared 35 different cities. And you have to wonder, are we successfully selling Dublin at the moment? Because we do measure up quite well in a number of categories. But if you take tech startups per million inhabitants, Tel Aviv is number 1 at 375 per a million inhabitants. Unfortunately, Dublin wasn't included in that report. In terms of accelerators, Tel Aviv and Israel have about 36 accelerators, and again, we would love to see a lot more. There are 12 in Dublin at the moment based on research by the Activating Dublin group. And then in terms of number of tech startups per annum, which is really the pipeline. The pipeline starts from the early stage startups. The bigger that pipeline is, the more chance of success as they work through the funnel. 1,900 in Tel Aviv, and we would have approximately 200 in Dublin. And I think another really telling difference between, say, Dublin as we are now compared to Tel Aviv and Israel is that nearly 40% of Israeli high-tech employees are working in the R&D departments of the major tech multinationals. That's not the case in Ireland yet. I suppose, why am I standing here today? Why am I pushing the agenda? What's my personal motivation? This photo here, it's not a traditional band, or it's not a Eurovision Song Contest entry. This is my parents on either side of us, and we're in the back garden of our house back in the 80s. My parents were very entrepreneurial. They had loads of startups. This was one of their startups. They saw the opportunity to sell Irish Aran jumpers to the German market. And we were press ganged into being the models for the winter collection. And you can see from our facial expressions how enthusiastic we were about the process. So very much they were the inspiration for me, choosing not to go down the career route, the traditional options, and very much looking to try and set up my own businesses. And that's my founder photo over there. Not as cool as the Google one you saw earlier, but we started in the front bedroom of my house, and within about 6 or 7 months, my partner, she said, listen, either the business moves out or I move out. She could, because we'd scaled up to about 5 or 6 staff, she couldn't get into the bathroom in the morning to get ready for work. She couldn't get near the coffee machine because the techies were at it all the time. So I really didn't know much about the hosting space, but what I did know at the time was that the internet was the future, and the hosting, dedicated servers, domains was the backbone of it. So we traded as register.ie, host.ie. And as Tyke said, sold to DigiWeb for a 7-figure sum. That's the acquisition there. So that's great. For me, it was the socialization, the personal example and role models that I chose to a startup career and to be an entrepreneur. That's not going to do it for Ireland. That's not going to get Dublin to #1 startup capital in Europe, if not the world. We really need a lot more entrepreneurs, as Minister Bruton has said. And we have quite a serious cultural challenge on our hands to achieve that. I was recently in the Royal Marine Hotel, and the conference of the Institute of Careers Guidance Counsellors was there, and I got chatting to a couple of them. And I said, well, look, when you're talking to secondary students and third-level students, when you talk about the traditional careers in law and accountancy, do you identify the options for a startup? Do you identify that we have the local enterprise office, etc.? And they just looked at me absolutely blankly. This is not on their radar whatsoever. I was doing a presentation somewhat similar to today, talking about entrepreneurship and startups, and I'm a program manager at the New Frontiers program in Hothouse, and talking about how we can help grow their startup. And I asked, just on a show of hands, of the 70 students who were in the room, how many of you, when you graduate in 2 months' time, are intending to go into a startup? Not a single hand went up. And I said, well, this is part of the cultural problem we have at the moment in Ireland. Then again, when you think about what the typical entrepreneur experience is in the first 2 years, is it a really appealing option to people? It's a hard slog. You're going to end up working 74 hours a week. You're going to end up making huge sacrifices. And the really tough thing is, if you're in the B2B space, the average enterprise sale can take nearly 1.5 years, earning the trust, getting the traction, getting those critical meetings. So we're talking about a different class of a person, a different type of motivation. And these entrepreneurs are people who really are motivated by making a difference. And that's why it's so important that our corporates have these people working within their business rather than being outside on the threatening side of things. So like in the typical startup, there's going to be highs. This is one of the guys on the New Frontiers program, Vince. He just got some good news that he'd received an investment in his company. He's absolutely delighted himself, and I just happened to be passing him at the time and grabbed his photo. There's also going to be lows. Unfortunately, this is statistics from the States, and after 6 or 7 years, approximately 60% of startups fail. However, I would point out the stats for some of the accelerators are actually far, far better. So if you are a startup who's been on an accelerator, you have a better chance. So the reason I'm here today is I have an ask. I would like to propose a different model where, rather than we have an adversarial startup versus the corporate world, where the startup is out there to eat you up and disrupt your business models and cannibalize you, my approach would be that, well, look, the reality is the average startup depends on their first corporate deal, their first PO from the big companies to validate them, to be able to raise investment. So there is a huge degree of dependency. And there is a really great model out there where this can be facilitated in a really structured way, and you can get startups working within your organization successfully to the benefit of both parties. And that's Wyra. We're lucky to have in Dublin here the Wyra Accelerator down on the Quays. And Wyra are part of the kind of Startup Ireland group, trying to make a difference. And for me, a practitioner in the space who's grown business, who's now working on a startup program, New Frontiers, the real difference I see with the Wyra model is that the startups are within the same building as the parents. So they're not kept at arm's length. They can have those casual conversations in the lift or over lunch that make the real difference in terms of earning trust. The Wyra model is a global accelerator model, so you really, from the word go, the startup is thinking internationally. Whereas for your typical startup, they're thinking, well, it's a really difficult, how do I get out of Ireland, how do I get out of UK market? And then they're very much championed within the parent multinational. So the startup is welcome within that organisation, and the introductions are made and facilitated. And it works. Opti Wi-Fi were on the New Frontiers program at Hothouse with me last year, and he got onto the Wyra Accelerator. And they've now closed a deal for over 1 million Wi-Fi access points in 15 countries. And I was chatting to him before presenting today and just talking about this. And he said, listen, I wouldn't have got that deal because the typical enterprise sale in the space I'm at would take so long otherwise. And being on the Wyra Accelerator and getting inside the parent company made the difference. There are loads, if you are considering a corporate venturing within your organisation, I'd strongly argue that you would. There are supports out there. Like the European Union has now set up Startup Europe Partnership to provide access to grassroots innovation and international database of startups. So I suppose I spoke earlier about the inspiration of my parents and getting involved in startups. This is my 5-month-old son, Killian, and who's a great eater. He's got a very healthy appetite, as you can see there. He's very much my motivation. Like, my personal goal is to see that by the time he's going to secondary school, by the time he's sitting down with the guidance counsellor, startups, the whole area of entrepreneurship is very much top of the list of career choices for people. So that's Startup Ireland. I'm very happy to have a chat with you afterwards, very happy to connect to you on LinkedIn, and I look forward to working with you to help make Dublin #1 hotspot for startups in the world. Thank you.